A person in the room asked Ramana Maharshi a question.
I don't know if the self is different from the ego.
How were you during deep sleep?
I don't know.
Who is it that doesn't know? Isn't it the awake self? Do you deny your existence during deep sleep?
I was, and I am, but I don't know who was asleep.
Exactly. The waking man says he knew nothing during sleep. Now he sees objects and knows he is here, while in deep sleep there were no objects and no observer. The same one who is speaking now was also there during deep sleep. What is the difference between these two states? There are objects and sensory activity now, but there were none in sleep. A new entity, the ego, has arisen. It acts through the senses, perceives objects, identifies itself with the body, and claims the self is the ego. In reality, what existed in deep sleep continues to exist now. The self is unchanging. It is the ego that has arisen. That which is born and dies is the ego. What remains unchanging is the self.
What is the root cause of Maya?
What is Maya?
Maya is wrong knowledge, an illusion.
For whom is the illusion? There must be someone to be deluded. Illusion is ignorance. The ignorant self sees objects, according to you. When objects themselves are absent, how can Maya exist? Maya is that which is not. What remains is the true self. If you say you see objects or that you do not know the real unity, then there are two eyes, the knower and the knowable object. But no one admits to having two eyes within themselves. The waking man says he himself was in deep sleep but unaware. He does not say that the one who was asleep was different from the one awake now. There is only one I, the self. This self is always conscious. It is unchanging. There is nothing other than the self.
What is the astral body?
Don't you have a body in your dreams? Isn't it different from the body lying on the bed?
Do we survive after death? Does the astral body survive physical death?
Just as in dreams you wake up after having new experiences, after physical death, another body is found, and so it continues.
People say the astral body exists for 40 years after physical death.
In the current body, you say the dream body is astral. But do you say that while in the dream body? What seems astral now appears real in the dream, and the current body becomes the astral one from that perspective. What is the difference between one astral body and another? There is no difference between the two.
Are there degrees of reality?
To say the dream body is unreal now, and that the current body was unreal in the dream, does not imply degrees of reality. In deep sleep, there is no experience of the body at all. There is always only one thing, and that is the self.
Why do religions speak of gods, heaven, hell, and so on?
Simply to help people understand that they are on the same level as this world and that only the self is real. Religions address the seeker's perspective. Take the Bhagavad Gita, for example. When Arjuna said he would not fight against his relatives to kill them and gain a kingdom, Sri Krishna replied, "There was never a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, and in the future, none of us will cease to exist." Later, when Krishna elaborated and claimed to have taught the sun god in ages past, Arjuna asked, "How can this be? You were born just a few years ago, and he lived ages ago." Krishna, understanding Arjuna's perspective, replied, "Yes, there have been many incarnations of both me and you. I know them all. You do not." These statements may seem contradictory, but they are correct from the questioner's perspective. Christ also declared that he existed before Abraham.
What is the purpose of these descriptions in religions?
To establish the reality of the self.
Bhagavan always speaks from the highest perspective.
People would not understand the pure, simple truth, this ever-present and eternal truth of the self. Is there anyone who is not aware of the self? People don't even like to hear about the self. They are more eager to know about heaven, hell, and reincarnation. Because they love mystery and resist simple truth, religions entertain them to eventually lead them to the self. Wandering here and there, one must return to the self. Why not remain in the self here and now? Other worlds require the self as their observer or speculator. Their reality depends on the observer's reality. They cannot exist without the observer. Therefore, they are not different from the self. Even the ignorant see only the self when they see objects, but they confuse the self with the object, the body, and senses, and act in the world. Subject and object merge into the self. There is no observer nor observed. Both are the self. There are not many I's. There is only one self. The state of equanimity is the state of bliss. The statement in the Vedas, I am this or that, is merely a tool to attain mental equanimity.
Then is it wrong to start with a goal?
If there is a goal to be achieved, it cannot be permanent. The goal must already exist. We seek to reach the goal with the ego, but the goal exists before the ego. What exists at the goal is prior even to our birth, that is, prior to the birth of the ego. Because we exist, the ego appears to exist as well. If we look at the self as the ego, then we become the ego. If we look at it as the mind, we become the mind. If we look at it as the body, we become the body. It is thought that creates these layers in so many ways. It is like seeing the shadow on the water trembling. Can anyone stop the trembling of the shadow? If it stopped trembling, you wouldn't notice the water, only the light. Similarly, do not pay attention to the ego and its activities. Instead, see only the light behind it. The ego is the I thought. The true I is the self.
This seems like a step toward realization.
Realization is already here. The thought-free state is the only real state. There is no action called realization. Is there anyone who does not realize the self? Does anyone deny their own existence? Speaking of realization implies two I's, one to realize and another to be realized. It suggests we are trying to realize what is not yet realized. But once we admit our existence, how can we not know ourself?
Because of thoughts, the mind.
Yes. It is the mind that intervenes and veils our happiness. How do you know you exist? If you say, because of the world around me, then how did you know you existed during deep sleep?
How can one get rid of the mind?
Is it the mind that wants to kill itself? The mind cannot destroy itself. Your task is to find the true nature of the mind. Then you will see that there is no mind. When the self is sought, the mind disappears. By abiding in the self, there is no need to concern yourself with the mind.
How can one get rid of fear?
What is fear? It is just a thought. If there is something beyond the self, there is reason to fear. But who perceives something external? First, the ego rises and perceives objects as external. If the ego does not arise, the self alone exists, and there is nothing external. For anything to appear external implies an internal observer. By seeking, no doubts or fears will arise. Not just fear, but all other ego-centered thoughts will dissolve along with the ego itself.
Is this method faster than the usual practice of cultivating qualities for salvation?
Yes. All negative qualities center around the ego. When the ego is gone, realization happens naturally. There are no good or bad qualities in the self. The self is free from all qualities. Qualities belong to the mind. The self is beyond qualities. If there is unity, there will also be duality. The number one gives rise to other numbers. Truth is neither one nor two. It simply is.
The difficulty lies in being in the thought-free state.
Leave the thought-free state to itself. Do not think of it as belonging to you. When you walk, you step forward without consciously thinking about each step. Similarly, your actions occur naturally, and the thought-free state is unaffected by them.
What is discernment in action?
Discernment becomes automatic, intuitive.
So, only intuition matters. Does intuition also develop?
Those who discovered great truths did so in the still depths of the self. The ego is like its own shadow cast on the ground. Trying to bury it is foolish. The self is one. If limited, it appears as the ego. If unlimited, it is infinite and the reality. Bubbles are numerous and different from each other, but the ocean is one. Similarly, egos are many, but the self is one and indivisible. When you're told that you are not the ego, realize the reality. Why do you still identify with the ego? It is like being told, do not think of a monkey while taking medicine. It becomes impossible. Similarly, when people hear about the reality, why do they keep meditating on I am Shiva or I am Brahman? The meaning must be traced and understood. Repeating mere words or thinking about them is not enough. Reality is simply the dissolution of the ego. Destroy the ego by inquiring into its identity. Since the ego has no true identity, it will disappear and the reality will shine by itself. This is the direct method. All other methods are based on maintaining the ego. In those other paths, many doubts arise, leaving the eternal question to be addressed in the end. But in the direct method, the ultimate question is raised from the beginning. No elaborate practice is needed for this inquiry. There is no greater mystery than this. We, being the reality, seek to attain the reality. We think something is hiding our reality and that it must be destroyed for the reality to be revealed. This is absurd. There will come a day when you will laugh at your past efforts. What will exist on that day is here and now.
So, is this all just a great pretense?
Yes. In the Yoga Vasistha, it is said, what is real is hidden, but what is false is revealed as true. We are actually experiencing the reality all the time, yet we do not realize it. Isn't this the greatest wonder? The inquiry, who am I, is the axe with which to cut down the ego. The mind has its own levels. Realization is perfection. It cannot be understood by the mind. Omniscience is being the whole. The whole refers only to the mind. The known and the unknown together form the whole. After transcending the mind, you remain as the self. Current knowledge is limited. That knowledge is unlimited. Therefore, it cannot be grasped by limited knowledge. Cease to be a knower, and perfection will be yours. The matrix is complex, but each of us holds a part of the solution. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and together we'll see beyond appearances.